For our last Patreon request, I'm going to cover one of the webcomics that Arthur wanted done. Of the three he suggested, Last Resort, Life of Fel, and Furry Experience, I went with the last one. Wasn't really sure about the first two, maybe another time perhaps, but maybe we'll get something out of this one? So similar to when I did Black Tapestries, I had to go outside of this comic's webpage for intel, since the About page just has the basic plot and most of the characters. So this comic, which is aptly named for the kind of story we're getting, was written and drawn by Ellen Natalie. Not much else to her except that this comic is based off true events from her own life, or whatever could have happened instead, for what's essentially a slice-of-life college comic. There's also heavy use of Mormon culture that's going to be present, which tend to influence a lot of this comic. But right now, just to see what about this comic could be interesting to read, I'm going to look at around 100 pages worth of content. There are story arcs to this series, which is about to hit well over 600 pages after going on for about 10 years, since 2009 mind you. And while many go by quickly, I just want to see how exactly this series works. But I can tell you one thing, it might just be self-aware. I want to draw a furry comic, but I don't know what sort of rules are involved. Pardon me, but how does that work? Are the animal folk in this world just called furries? Or is it something else entirely? On the profile page for Ellen on Smack Jeeves, the character icon she uses is for Catherine. And yes, they do make light of this name choice for a cat, so perhaps Catherine is meant to represent the kind of person Ellen was in real life at this point in time? Either way, I don't believe there are any special rules for using furries in fiction. If you're writing for a certain story genre, just look into what makes those work, but make everyone anthro. It'll work itself out. So the comic itself is mostly about 3 roommates sharing an apartment. Besides Catherine, we have Rhonda, often going by Ronnie, and Dawn, who isn't officially Mormon like Catherine is, but does enjoy church-going activities. Now forgive me, because I'm mostly going off Wikipedia for what is mostly known about Mormon culture, so it's probably not going to be 100% accurate, but according to this, body piercings are discouraged unless it's for medical purposes, or if they're just a pair of modest earrings. Of course, Ronnie isn't part of any religion, though Catherine doesn't seem to mind anyway, but that doesn't stop her from directing Catherine to what's essentially porn. Because furries!
That's the joke.
You suck, McBain!
So the moral is, yeah, there's furry porn, but there's still plenty of good non-porn ones out there. Hey girls, check out what was on sale at Sexy Beast Boutique!
Shut up, Ronnie.
So, first world anthro problems aside, these first few pages at least do some characterization for the girls. Catherine is considerably cheerful, but sometimes naive. Ronnie is a little vain, but seems more stylish than the others. And Dawn is considered the kind, gentle type who tries to set things straight, at least with her friends, and no matter how tiresome it gets. It also seems to set the tone that this comic has, as similar to Sabrina Online, it sometimes will break the fourth wall a bit. Like Catherine realizing, oh, popular comics use a lot of color. Well, you could have gone the route of Sandra and Wu, but yeah, maybe that's a topic for another day. Okay, in fairness, pages like this are considered filler, so you don't take them too seriously. At least now Ellen demonstrates her ability to use colors in the comic. Like with many artists, I'm not going to be overly critical since they do show improvement over time. Here it isn't too simplistic design-wise, though I'm not sure how to think of her using gradients. The expressions seem like the usual mix of Eastern and Western styles, and both work okay. There's also some clever use of background imagery, like using notepaper to show what someone is writing when they're not in a good state of mind, though at least early on they seem to rely on a lot of featureless backgrounds. Which can work, though with how some of the panels get laid about, I question the point of some of them. Like, why this blue box? It's not like it's the floor, unless it's meant to transition to the next conversation before changing the shot again. Yeah, unless I'm just missing something with what can or can't work with positioning, I'm not sure if having Ronnie like this, in the same frame as where she's shown laying down on the couch, really seems like a good choice. So, yeah, a lot of the art early on isn't that appealing, but maybe the writing will tide you over. The girls have their own woes based on the sort of classes they take. Like Dawn is studying for a business major and has to put up with those not willing to be professional about keeping pencils on hand, which, by the way, Brian here is totally wearing the Joey Wheeler outfit. Ronnie is definitely into fitness, but gets overwhelmed with how much they do and where they have to go. And then Catherine is like your average college student who can fit anywhere but gets bored and distracted easily. In a way, you can relate to them if you ever felt the stress of college life. Hell, I think Catherine might even be into stress eating since she eats a whole loaf of bread as one giant sandwich, has a ton of frozen dinners, eats buckets of ice cream within minutes, and has to be convinced to start eating healthy. Though, like any cat, the sound of crashing is enough to spook her till her fur reaches out. Actually, she only does that when someone curses. Unless your parents fought a lot and it's related to childhood trauma, this just seems a bit... It doesn't really gel well with me humor-wise. At least I think it just takes a while for the punchline or something to really kick in. Because after enough torture, Catherine ends up swearing, and soon, she's able to shock Ronnie with some very colorful words. Now, okay, that's funny. What's not so much is when Dawn gets fired from her job, because of course she openly shows her disdain for her indecisive boss, and what follows is a somewhat exaggerated but reasonable showcase of what it's like to go through job interviews, having doubts about the kind of people they hire, even if that in itself might be a bit judgmental, and then someone is revealed to be dead and no one noticed. The punchline? A dead coworker means an extra 10-minute break. Dark? But eventually they do go about trying to develop characters. For instance, while Catherine and Dawn are religious, Ronnie is obviously not, so she doesn't go to church at all. However, she remembers a time where she did go to church and met someone nice who said that everyone would be welcome at church, and decides, why not? But rather than go to where her friends are, she goes to somewhere else. What gets me though is, she's apparently told that this church is for family wards, so she should go to the one for students. But she gets rather upset that she's basically being told to leave despite this being the same religion as the other, and takes this as like an act of betrayal that churches don't in fact welcome all. That just seems a bit excessive, since if a church was going to not welcome someone, it would be out of like race, personal beliefs, or other things that the religion wouldn't really allow. Those would be things that would be understandable to be upset about, since if a religion is meant to promote like kindness and goodwill, why reject someone? And they're trying to relay the idea that people can believe in some of the good sides of the religion while acknowledging some of the faults of it. Hence why some people would still do things like go to church, because they do find some of their core beliefs to be good, but for one reason or another don't fully devote themselves enough to consider themselves a member. Then again, this all started because the bishop merely recommended she stick with the student ward since their church was for families. She overreacted over nothing. It just seems like a poor attempt to make her despise Mormons. I don't know what Ellen's exact beliefs are, but based on what's been shown so far, it doesn't seem like she shows any sort of malice toward people not into the religion. Though I would probably need to read beyond what we're looking at right now to see whether or not she's one of those people who consider certain human topics as a "I don't agree with your life choice, but you're free to do it" that delegitimize groups of people. Though in the case of something topical, you know how some people see songs that when you think about it are derogatory in hindsight, and people debate on it being the case or not. Well, they kinda do that here, but in an almost funny bit, they reference songs that are animal-based, like How Much Is That Doggy in the Window being about prostitution, Little Bunny Foo Foo being prejudice against mice? What? Oh, and Three Blind Mice being about a woman killing the handicapped, yet the one initially being upset over the others isn't upset over this one. What are you trying to say? That people are hypocrites? Or perhaps because music is a deep and complex medium that everyone tends to interpret it in different ways, so you're not always going to agree on a common theme, or I don't know. People are allowed to be upset about stuff so long as it's within reason, and some things might slip past them without fully realizing it. Now they do develop the other girls in this comic. Dawn is apparently unbaptized because her mother is a Mormon, but her father is Catholic, which might lead to her having no distinct religion, possibly due to family concerns? I don't know. But also, Catherine doesn't like meeting new people, despite getting along fine with Dawn and Ronnie, since she sees them as friends rather than people. Now that is very relatable, since it can be hard to really socialize with other people. Some find comfort with needing time to really work with them or need space. That's fine. The only thing though is it comes out of needing to work out a presentation, and while her partner chooses illegal immigration, Catherine chooses what I think is meant to be media bias, where they choose topics they feel are issues versus real issues. I'm almost afraid to ask what their views are on these things, considering how some religions feel about those outside their own. This comic is certainly trying to find some middle ground with what they know isn't a commonly acceptable thing in Mormon culture, while acknowledging how the culture itself being flawed in topics like sex education. The scenarios going into how her parents avoided really talking about it are a little amusing, and Ronnie needing to teach Catherine about sex and how at some point you're gonna end up wanting it is, I think it's meant to set up a future relationship, seeing as how she tried avoiding painting this one guy in the nude because she believes sex is meant for marriage. But based on all the talk about sex and how condoms work, I want to believe that this is at least a topic that isn't demonizing, since it's just sex. They all would still do it, even if there's no real instance of hard nudity in the comic. They just have different viewpoints on when they should actually do it. So, this is like a real instance where it's okay to disagree on something. At least, right now anyway. I don't know what most of the later pages are like. Man, 100 pages of character building, showcasing a person's experience with religion and how they learn sex is quite something. Though I can see this as just an okay religious comic that does at least try to be neutral on certain topics, but goes about the tone of a high school sitcom. Later pages, as the artwork shows improvement anyway, do at least try expanding on some of the other students that go to the school. I'm kinda tempted to look at more on my own time, especially if they're willing to acknowledge things like One Punch Man. That and some of the things they cover seem more wholesome than what was attempted earlier. As far as things are right now, just based on these pages shown, it doesn't appear to be that bad regarding those outside the religion, nor does it seem to assert that you have to follow in it. I could be wrong and maybe there is something I'm missing from this, but the way things are, it's just a goofy comic that others may find more enjoyable than I could. There are some good ideas here and more that I didn't get to cover, so unless this gets requested again, I may have to come back at a different time, since right now my impression of it is mixed, but cautiously optimistic. And with that, we cleared the Patreon board. Tune in next time though, because we're gonna rock the dragon with this coming bonus objective.